Good day, all. Welcome to another episode for Life Sciences Great Living. This time around, we're looking at photosynthesis. So, when it comes to the photosynthesis, we see this is a process whereby plants make its own food using sunlight, which is going to be used to form glucose, which is in turn stored in plants so that starch can be produced. Presented a screen to everyone. I'll repeat again. We're seeing when it comes to photosynthesis, this is a process whereby plants produce their own food using sunlight to form glucose, which is stored in plants so that you can have starch. So, when it comes to photosynthesis, there are so many terms that you're going to come across, and it is very important for you to know now from the word go what are some of those terms that you might come across. So the first term that we have there is called the radiant energy. So this is the energy from the sun that is needed by the plants for photosynthesis to occur. So we're simply saying radiant energy, this is the energy that is produced by the sun, and this is the same energy that is needed by the plants so that photosynthesis can occur. And then the second term that we have there is called the chloroplast. So when it comes to the chloroplast, this is the organelle that you're going to find in plants. But the most important thing that you have to know is that when it comes to the chloroplast, this is the site for photosynthesis. You can come across such questions whereby they're going to ask you, what is the name given to the site for photosynthesis? And all of you have to remember that it's called a chloroplast. The third term that we have there is called the chlorophyll. So when it comes to the chlorophyll, this is the green pigment that is required by the plant so that photosynthesis can occur. And then we have what are called the thylakoids. So thylakoids are basically the membranous sacs of the chloroplast that contain your chlorophyll. I'll repeat again. We're saying thylakoids are the membranous sacs of the chloroplast that contains chlorophyll. And then we have grana is in fifth term. So when it comes to your grana, this one is a stick of thylakoids, right, where the light freeze is going to occur. Someone might already be asking, okay, what is light freeze now? Because I don't know what is light freeze. So light freeze, right, when it comes to photosynthesis, we're simply saying photosynthesis have got two stages or it's going to occur in two phases, if I put it like that. One phase is called the light phase and the other one is known as a dark phase. So now when it comes to your grana, this is where your light phase is going to occur. So when you're looking at your grana is made up by stack of thylakoids, which simply means you're going to have thylakoids piling or stacked on top of each other. That is the proper term I can use. You're going to find out that the thylakoids are going to be stacked on top of each other, and they're stacked on top of each other, therefore what we call a grana. So when it comes to that grana, it is the one that allows your light phase to occur. So what is light phase, right? Light phase is a stage of protein synthesis in which is dependent on light. So grana, it's where your light phase is going to occur, and your light phase is another stage of protein synthesis that is dependent on light for photosynthesis to occur so that oxygen can be formed. I'll repeat again. Your light phase is a stage in photosynthesis which depends on light so that it can form oxygen. We have our sixth term, which is called the stroma. So when it comes to the stroma again, it's also a part of the chloroplast where your dark phase is going to occur. So someone might be asking, what is dark phase again? So dark phase, this is the stage of photosynthesis that does not require light, but it occurs during light phase in order for it to form the glucose or for it to produce the glucose. So what happens, guys, is that when it comes to the dark phase, right, it doesn't require light in order for it to function. But one thing that you have to take note is it is going to occur during the light phase so that it can form the product that it needs. And those products are your glucose. So glucose is produced or is formed in the dark phase, but it does not require light in order for it to be produced, but it occurs during the light phase. And then the ninth term that we have there is called the stomata. So when it comes to the stomata, we have done it in grade 10. In grade 10, we did mention that when it comes to the stomata, these are tiny openings that you find on the leaf and they're responsible for gaseous exchange, which is the outtake of oxygen and the intake of carbon dioxide. So when it comes to stomata again, it is the one that allows the water to be lost during evapotranspiration, of which these are the subtopics that we covered in grade 10, and I still believe everyone remembers them. The next term that we have there is called photolysis, right? Photolysis means to split or it means to separate. So, for example, we know that when it comes to water, right, we say, or when it comes to its chemical component, we say it is known as H2O, correct? So, when it now comes to H2O, you might find out, remember, those are two elements that have been joined together, right? You do it in NS grade 9 when you're doing chemistry, right? So when it comes now to photolysis, right? Photolysis is the separation of the hydrogen as well as oxygen. So once your hydrogen and oxygen splits, we say or we term that as your photolysis. We are still going to come across photolysis when we are explaining your photosynthesis, which is very important for you to know that photo means light and then lysis means split. So it simply means your hydrogen and oxygen are going to split in the presence of light. And I'll repeat again, we're simply saying photolysis means to split, right? Photo means light and lysis means split. This is when your hydrogen and your oxygen atoms are going to separate. So once those two elements separate, when do they separate? They separate in the presence of light. That's why we're simply saying photolysis is the separation of hydrogen and oxygen with the presence or during the presence of the radiant energy. You are going to understand it more when I'm explaining the light phase to you. And then we have what is called phosphorylation. So when it comes to the phosphorylation, this is the formation of the energy transporting molecule. I'll repeat again. Phosphorylation is the formation of the energy transporting molecule, which is known as your ATP. So that ATP is the one that we have on number 12. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Let me write it down here for you. So we're simply saying ATP stands for adenosine tri. It stands for adenosine triphosphate. That is your ATP. So this is the energy carrier, which is the one that we are still going to look at as we continue. All right. And then we have your glucose. I think by now we all know, I've already mentioned it, that when it comes to your glucose, these are the carbohydrates that are formed during your photosynthesis. And then we're moving on to our next slide, where we have the phases, of which I've already explained this, the two phases of photosynthesis. All right. So when it comes to the phases of photosynthesis, all right. So when it comes to these phases of photosynthesis, my page over there. All right. So these phases of photosynthesis, they occur in the chloroplast. Please don't forget that. So we're simply seeing your photosynthesis, you're going to have the light phase and you're going to have the dark phase, of which we've already mentioned before that during light phase, this is where light is going to be required so that oxygen can be formed. And then during the dark phase, this is a phase where there's no light, but it's going to occur during light so that glucose can be formed. So the next slide, guys, this is where you have your process of light phase, and it's very important for you to know what happens during the light phase. So you have your number 1, you have your number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So as I'm going to be explaining, I'm going to be using the numbers, and it's very important for each and every one of you to know what each and every phrase or each and every stage that we are going to explain, what it stands for, what it does, and what is its function. So we have your number 1 there, right? Which is known as your radiant energy, as it is already indicated there. That is your sun, right? And then if you look just where you have your number 2 there, you have your grana. We've already told you that your grana is the stacks of thylakoids, and then you have a picture now on how those thylakoids are going to be stacked together so that they can form a grana. So when it comes to light phase, I want to explain the process on how it occurs. So we have our number 1 over there. So the radiant energy, right, is going to be absorbed by the chlorophyll that you find in the grana. So I'll repeat again. Number 1, the radiant energy is going to be absorbed by the chlorophyll in the grana, and the water as well is going to be absorbed into the grana of the chloroplast, which simply means that your radiant energy together with the water, they are all going to be absorbed into the grana. Then what happens is that we move to number 3, whereby now your radiant energy is now going to cause water to separate during a process called photolysis, whereby your hydrogen and oxygen are going to split. So once your hydrogen and oxygen split, we look at number 5, whereby your oxygen will then leave the chloroplast and goes into the atmosphere via the stomata. So we're simply saying, when it comes to radiant energy, please allow me, guys, to go back. I want to explain it so that all of you can understand. We look at number 1. Your number 1 is your radiant energy. And then we look at number 2, where we have your grana there. So we're simply saying the radiant energy is going to be absorbed by the chlorophyll into the grana. So the chlorophyll absorbs the radiant energy so that photosynthesis can occur. We all agree on that. So what happens is that your radiant energy is going to be absorbed by the chlorophyll in the grana, and then when it comes to your water, it is going to be absorbed into the grana of the chloroplast. And then the radiant energy comes into play again in the presence of water, where it will allow the water molecule to split. So when your water molecule split, it simply means that your hydrogen element and your oxygen element, they are both going to be separated. So once they get separated, your hydrogen is going to carry a rich energy component. That's why now it no longer just a mere hydrogen, but it's going to behave, it's going to be known as a hydrogen rich energy component. That's why you can see that now it has been, or now it actually carries a plus sign there on top, which simply means that now it has been energized. That's why we're saying it is a energy rich hydrogen atom. And then we look at our oxygen. Remember, once the oxygen has been produced in the plant, it does not get to stay in the plant, but now your oxygen is going to live via the stomata into the atmosphere. That is how we as human beings are going to be able to breathe in that oxygen. So we actually able to receive or to get access to that oxygen after the process of photolysis has occurred, which is the separation of oxygen and hydrogen. And then from number 5, we go to our number 6, right? So if we are looking at your number 5, before we proceed to number 6, right? Now what happens is that the hydrogen rich energy ion that was formed here during photosynthesis, it is going to be carried by what we call an NADP so that it can form an NADPH, right? And then that NADPH together with the ATP, they are going to be combined and they are going to be formed during the light phase, and then they are used during the dark phase. I'll repeat again. We are simply saying that when it comes to energy-rich ion that is formed during photosynthesis, which is under number 4, what happens is that it is going to carry an ATP that is formed by phosphorylation. If you remember when we did our terminologies on the phosphorylation, we did specify that phosphorylation is the formation of the energy transporting molecule, which is called the ATP. So that energy transporting molecule now, it is going to be mixed together with the NADPH so that it can be used during dark phase. I hope everyone understands that. And then we're moving on to our dark phase. So when it comes to the dark phase, please remember, guys, we said this one is going to occur in the absence of light. So when it now comes to a dark phase, right, this one, it occurs or is going to take place in the stroma, as we have already indicated before. So if you look at number 1, we have your carbon dioxide there. You look at your number 2, we have got your carbon dioxide, your energy-rich carrier. You've got your ATP, which forms glucose. And then number 3, we have our starch granules. So these diagrams, guys, as they are very self-explanatory. And I always advise learners that it's best for you to know how to explain these phases by just looking at a diagram, because once you do so, there's no need for you to start cramming notes because you already have got an understanding by just looking at the diagrams. So if we're looking at your number 1, right, this is where your carbon dioxide enters the leaves via the stomata from the atmosphere. If we can go back a bit to the light phase, you will remember that in number 5, we said your oxygen is going to leave the chloroplast via the stomata into the atmosphere. But now we're simply saying when it comes to the dark phase, right, your carbon dioxide is going to enter the leaf via the stomata, right? And then where is that carbon dioxide coming from? It is coming from the atmosphere. So the second thing that is now going to happen once your carbon dioxide from the atmosphere enters the leaf via the stomata, we are going to see that your carbon dioxide together with your energy-rich hydrogen atom from the light phase, they get combined with your adenosine triphosphate altogether so that carbohydrates are formed. Your carbohydrates being your glucose. I'll repeat again from the top. We're saying during dark phase, it occurs in the absence of light, but it occurs during light phase. So your carbon dioxide is going to enter the leaf from the atmosphere via the stomatum. Once it does so, your carbon dioxide together with the energy-rich hydrogen atom, right, they are going to be combined using the adenosine triphosphate where your glucose is going to be formed. So once your carbon dioxide together with the hydrogen energy-rich atom, it's joined together with the adenosine triphosphate, they lead to the formation of glucose, which is your carbohydrate. And then the excess glucose that is going to be formed, right, it is going to be stored in a plant as your starch in the stroma of the glucose. So what we're simply saying is that your carbon dioxide enters the leaf via the stomata from the atmosphere, and then your carbon dioxide and your energy-rich hydrogen atoms from the light phase, they are combined using the adenosine triphosphate so that they can form your glucose. And then the excess glucose that is going to be formed, it is going to be stored in a plant as starch. So when it comes to the starch, you're going to find it in the stroma of the chloroplast. And I believe everyone has understood by just looking at these diagrams and providing an explanation. And then the last thing that we're going to look at is the differences or the comparisons between the phases of photosynthesis. So we're going to start by looking at your light phase. So when it comes to the light phase, we say light phase occurs in the grana. We've already specified that, and you've already seen how a grana looks like, of which we said your grana is going to be a stack of the thylakoids. And then in order for your light phase to occur, you actually require light, of which is something that we had already explained. And then during light phase again, your photolysis occurs. I believe now everyone knows that photolysis is the separation, or it is the splitting of the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms. So once your oxygen and your hydrogen separate, we call that process photolysis, whereby your photo means light and your lysis, we said it means to split. So photolysis occurs in the presence of light. Your hydrogen and oxygen are separated in the presence of light. And then the radiant energy and water are absorbed, and they're used for photolysis as well as phosphorylation. That's why if you look at photolysis, we said in the presence of radiant energy, your photolysis is going to occur. Well, simple means you need the radiant energy as well as the water that will be absorbed so that your photolysis and your photophosphorylation can occur. Then we have our dark phase. So when it comes to the dark phase, we see this one, it occurs in the stroma and it does not require light, but it occurs during the light phase. That's what you have to remember. And then we said carbon dioxide is absorbed from the atmosphere, because you have to remember, guys, that in light phase, your oxygen is the one that was released into the atmosphere. But when it comes to the dark phase, this is where your carbon dioxide is absorbed by the plant via the stomata from the atmosphere. It is very important for you guys to remember that. And your hydrogen and carbon dioxide, they are going to combine using your adenosine triphosphate so that glucose can be formed. So this is it, guys, for photosynthesis. We are going to meet next time in our lesson. I hope everyone enjoyed the lesson and will now get an understanding when it comes to photosynthesis. See you next time in our next lesson.